Hello mate, and welcome to another episode of Let's Code Season 4, this time it's personal. In this episode we're going to do a little bit of an advanced trick. A trick which allow us to pass file names in to determine whether or not buttons should be appearing on the screen. Before I get started, a huge thank you to everyone for subscribing and hitting the notification icon. That really helps me out. And of course an even bigger thank you to my members and patrons. Your names are going to run across the screen at the end of the video. So let's jump into this then. So the first thing we need to do is come into our classes file at the top. And now what we're going to come down here and do is we're going to create a new function. And we're going to say define parse clickies. And that's going to make more sense in a minute. We're just going to put parse in there for now just so we don't get any fluff ups. Now we're going to come up to the top here. UI button, interact button, NPCs, audio files. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a new class now. And the class is going to be called clicky. We're going to make it all capitals. And it's going to inherit from object. And then we're going to define our init. So underscore underscore init underscore underscore. And what we want is some properties. Self being the first one, of course. Name is going to be the next one, and we'll say nice name. I don't know if we're going to use that or not, but it's going to... It might be something we want to use further down the line. Next thing we want to do is say location. Then we're going to say button type. Yeah. And we're going to say is active. And then we'll put a function at the end of it as well. And that will do for that. Then we have to do our self.name equals name, self.nice name equals nice name, self.location equals location, self.button type equals button type. Self dot is active equals is active, self dot func equals func. Cool. That's pretty much all we need for now. And then we're going to have to create a list of clickies. So we'll say clickies equals an empty list. Just going to close up these gaps because this is now apparently where we're defining all of our lists. That's cool. So the next thing we need to do is we actually have to search through our folder. What we're going to do is we're going to have a folder where all of our clickable buttons are going to be. Those buttons are going to be items from the background of a location. So for example, a book on a bookshelf or a coffee mug on a counter or something like that. Something that you can interact with in the environment. Now we could just create a list of them the same as we have done with all of our other properties. We could just come into defaults and defines. We could just define them like this, which is fine. But the idea of creating a game engine is that we want to make it as simple as possible for ourselves further down the line when we're actually filling our game with content. So the best way of doing that is to just have a system where we name our files a certain way, and then the game interprets the file name into some other kind of information. So for example, I could give my file name, I could call it something like tree underscore tree with a big T underscore garden underscore item underscore true, and then the function. And realistically, we don't even actually need the function. We could just extrapolate the function based on these things. But what I want to do is have the ability to have a different button on display if the chapter is different. So we could actually import, add some more properties. So for example, instead of function, we could just have a chapter number there. In fact, let's just add chapter anyway. What's the worst that can happen? Chapter self.chapter equals chapter. And actually what we're going to do as well is we're going to add an icon to that as well. And the reason we're going to do that is because we don't need to have, whereas with our characters and stuff we've got like a property avatar, because we're already reading the file name, we don't need to have a separate property for that. We can just have that in there, and then the file name that's read can just simply get dumped straight into self.icon. So that saves us a little bit of hassle. So back down at the bottom here, we now need to do our parse clickies. So the first thing I want to do is say for q in ren'py.list_files common equals false. That's a capital F on the false. And now we're going to say if q.starts with, and add an end bracket there. Now this is where we're basically checking that it's in the folder that we want it to be in. So I'm going to just create a folder called, let's just say UI/buttons/. And then we can append a list with this value. So let's just create a list here. We're just going to go temp buttons equals an empty list, because we're going to pass this information into our list of classes further down the line. What we also need to do is access the global list, which we created up here. So we're going to come up here, double click that, Control C, and then we're going to come down to the bottom and we're just going to go global, oops, it's going to spell it correctly, global clickies. That means we can access the global list clickies and fill it with what we need it to. So now we've ascertained whether or not it's in the correct folder. So now what we want to do is just quickly add that to our temp list. So what we're going to say is temp buttons.append q. And we have to put that in brackets, otherwise it's all going to not work properly. Cool. So now we're now adding that file name to our temporary list, which is what we need. And the reason we're doing this rather than just working straight from this Ren'Py list file is that we don't want to keep going through every single file over and over again. We're going to run this procedure once at the start of the game, and then we're going to go through. But even so, if we get to the stage where our file is maybe tens of gigabytes in size, we don't want to have to wait for it to go through all the files more than necessary. So we're going through all the files and we're pulling out the ones that are in the correct folder. And then next time we rotate through the list, we only have to go through the list of files that actually are within this folder, rather than having to rotate through all of the files once again. So temp buttons.append q. So we've now added this file. Let's say we've got a file called tree.png. So we've added the entirety of the file name that begins with UI/buttons /tree.png, and we've added that to this list. So now we can rotate through that list and pull out more information. So we'll come back to here, and now we can say for q in temp buttons, and now we can go through each one. So we can say, let's have a think. So we're going to want to create another variable. It's a temporary variable, so we're just going to say x equals q, and then we're going to shave off the first few letters because we don't need the UI buttons bit except for in the file name. The rest of it is just the rest of the properties that we need, we're going to have to pull up away from that. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Going to double check that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11, we're going to say 11, comma, colon 0. So what we're doing is we're saying that x is a string that is equal to q without the first 11 characters. Nice and simple. Then we're just going to create another set, or another variable. We're going to just call this one like file words equals x.split, and we're going to use our underscore as the character which we're going to split the string up into. So what we're doing here is, let's say we've got a string called tree underscore garden underscore 32 underscore wall or something random like that, what this is going to do is this is going to create a list of these words without the underscore. So property 0 is going to be tree, property 1 is going to be garden, 2 is going to be 32, and 3 is going to be wall. So it's going to allow us to actually pass that information and make something useful out of it, basically. So we've split that up. Now what we need to do is find out what those properties are. So rather than messing around, what we can do is we can create some other variables and pull out those bits of information, but we actually have to remember what those bits of information are going to be. So we have to come back up to our clicky thing here. This is our class. This is what we're going to be filling our clickies list with. So we need to get those properties. So I'm actually going to paste this just down here. Nice and simple. And what we can do now is, this is where we're going to decide on the file name convention. So we're going to just come out and we're going to say, the first thing is obviously going to be the name, then we're going to go underscore, then we're going to go nice name, then we're going to go location. Yes. Then we're going to have button type. Then we're going to have is active. Now, this is going to be the default, is it active or not? It's not going to be the is it staying active, because obviously if we have buttons that aren't active at the start of the game, maybe they can't become active later. So this is the initial how they start out, if they're active or not. Function is actually not something that we're going to get from the file name, because we're going to determine that using a different property, a different kind of way of parsing it. So we'll get rid of that, or no, actually we'll leave that in there. Chapter I'm actually going to have in there, and icon we don't need either. So there we go. So that's what our class is going to be filled with. So we can now say, let's just go with that. And now we don't need the .png at the end. So we can actually think about that in a, let's have a think. Actually, I'm going to remove the last 4 as well, because we don't want the file extension at the end. Cool. So the icon is the only bit we need to get from the original value. The rest of it is going to be these properties here. So we're going to say clickies.append, and they're going to be the class clicky. Now we need to add all of these properties in there. So what we're going to do is say file words 0. And then we're probably going to just do that many times. So we'll copy that and we'll just paste that. 3, that's going to be our location. So we'll just change that to 1. That's going to be our nice name. That's going to be our location. That's going to be our button type. That's going to be if it's active or not. Function is going to be a value. We're going to just sort that out in a minute. So I'll just put that there for now as a placeholder. Then we'll say 5, because we don't have a function in the file name. And then icon is going to also be a property that we're going to pull out. In fact, that's actually just going to be Q. So we don't need to worry about messing around with that. So the only thing we need to do is ascertain what func is going to be. And lo and behold, you might be wondering why I put this down here, and that is precisely why. So we can say temp func equals, and then we're going to simply go with that as going to be our function. So actually what we're probably going to do is we're not going to need the nice name in our file name. So what we can do is we're going to have to need these properties again. So name is going to be the first one. Then we're going to have location. So that's going to be 2. Then we're going to have the function, which is going to be, let's say we've got a file, and we're going to have chapter, if there is one. So what we are going to have to do is be mindful of the fact that we need to convert this property chapter into an integer. So I'm glad I remembered to do that, because that's this one. So we're actually going to say int file words there. So I'm glad I remembered that. That's going to be an integer value, so we're going to copy that. In fact, in the function, we don't care if it's a integer or not, but in the class we do, because we might want to do stuff with that later on. But as far as... So we've got the name, location, and the chapter as our function, and I'm pretty happy with that being all we add. Don't think we need anything else in there. In fact, what I might do is just get rid of those, and then I'm going to say something like func underscore. And that just means that we know when we're looking through our files, if it's got a func at the beginning of it, that means that it is the function associated with a clicky. And I think that'll be it. So now we can say temp func in there. And that is our class now fully populated with information, so we can get rid of that. In fact, no, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave that in there. I'm going to control exit, and I'm going to paste it in here, and I'm going to do that. And that just means that when I come back later on and look at this, I can remember what everything actually is in that. So let's go through everything that we've done right now before we do anything else. So we've created a class called clickies, which has all of these properties in it. What we've now done is we've gone through all of our files, every single file contained within the game folder, and we've checked if they are in the UI/buttons folder. If they are, we've added them to a list. Then we've gone through that list of only those files, and we've taken every single file name and we've trimmed off the path, and we've trimmed off the file extension, and then we've separated the remaining text into different values, which is going to be listed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like any other class. Now what we've got is a file naming convention, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We know what our file names needs to be, so we could in fact, at the after part of this, we can now say file names must be UI/buttons/ name underscore nice name underscore location underscore is active underscore. We don't need func, we just need chapter. So we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's have a think about what that is. Button type. See, nearly forgot this. Actually, button type's meant to go in there. Underscore there is active, and then last but not least is going to be our chapter. So there you go. And then obviously .png. It has to be a PNG because otherwise there's going to be no transparency. So there you go. That's just going to help us out a little bit further down the line when we actually start creating these icons. So basically now our game is ready for us to convert whatever files we put into this into our list. Now what we have to bear in mind is for the initial part, before we actually create any of these images, this list is going to consist of 0. So we have to remember in our screen that we have to add a clause in there to say if this list, if Clicky's list is empty, don't do anything. Otherwise it's just going to throw up an error because it will say list index, list out of index or whatever, and it will crash and we won't be able to run our game. So we have to now remember when we create our Clicky's screen that we have to take that into account. So we're going to save that and we're going to come into our screens and we're going to add a new file. This one's going to be called clickies.rpy. Going to go screen, clicky screen, like so. And before we do anything else is if clickies is an empty list, fact, well, what we'll do is we'll say it is not an empty list. Then we'll do stuff. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to skip through. So that's fine like that. So what we're going to say is for q in clickies. I'm going to say if q.location equals location. So if we are in the right place, and q.is active image button. Now we're going to say idle equals q.icon, hover equals q.icon. Marvelous. Save that again. So this is the basics, the very, very basics, but we have to make sure that we're definitely checking to make sure that there is actually information within this list. If there isn't, if the folder is empty, then it's going to throw a hissy fit if we try to rotate through the list, because it will say list out of range, and then we're going to be in trouble. So we have to remember that. Next, we're going to say action. We don't actually have to put equals in there, so I'm glad I reminded myself of that. We also need to say focus mask true. Otherwise, it's just going to make it a pain in the bum. We only want the button to be active when we hover over the active pixels. Otherwise, it's just going to throw a hissy fit. And now we've got action. First thing we want to do is set variable click type. And we have to make sure we've actually got that variable correct. So we'll come back to defaults and defines, and we'll find that variable. There you go. Click type there, Control C. And we're going to give it the value of q.button type, like that. Next, we're going to return, and we need to do that with a capital R, return, and then we're going to return q.func. Marvelous. So when we click on the button, it's going to return this. Nice and simple, nice and simple. And then what we can do is save that. And we've got to remember now to add this to our main UI. So I'm going to say Control C, and we're going to find our main UI. Now this one has to appear directly above the background image and behind the character screen, because we don't want characters having random objects hovering in front of them. So we have to say use Control V, click screen, save it, and that should be good. So now if we come back to our classes file, we can look and see if we've made any faux pas. Yes, we've made one straight away. We need to actually put that there like so. And now when we test our game, we can see that it's not crashed, which is the most important thing. So what I want to do now is actually create a button of some sort to put on this screen, the My House screen, so that we can actually check whether or not our system's going to work. But before we do anything else, firstly, we need to call this function. So we're going to do that from our defaults and defines, and we can do that. We're just going to do that at the top of this. So we'll just put a $sign there and stick that in there. Now that's going to run through, and it's going to check if any of those files are in there. Now it does occur to me that we also need to check whether the file, the list is empty before we call this, otherwise it's going to have a hissy fit. So we need to say if temp buttons is equal to an empty list, return. And that just means that if we get to this stage and we've been through and we've checked if there's anything contained within that, if there's nothing in the list, then we're just going to jump straight out of the function rather than going through all this again, because there's no point. It's only going to start filling temp buttons, or rather filling our clickies list, if we actually have any information to put in, and then that just saves us a whole lot of heartache later on further down the line. Remembering that because we're comparing, we need to put 2 equal symbols in there. So another almost mistake just happening there. And in fact, if I was to double check our clicky screen, I'm pretty sure that no, we haven't, because it's got a not equals there. So that is actually fine. And another silly mistake that I've just noticed is we actually missed out the S at the end of list files. That would just cause a crash as well. So Another lucky catch there. It's inevitable that when we code like this, we are going to encounter the odd problem or two. So this is a good time to start debugging before we go too far down the rabbit hole, because this is the point where we've got things that are still simple enough that we can easily fault find. Additional to that, I've just noticed that I've missed out the S at the end of that one, so we're just going to stick that there. Make sure we haven't made that mistake again. I think we're good. I think that's the only one I accidentally left the S off of. So now I'm testing and we can see that the game is running, no crashes, so that's a good sign. Now we need to jump back to our script file, because we've currently got if click type equals UI button, but what we're going to do is create a new type of clicky type. So we're going to say if click type equals, and this time we're going to say item click, and we just have to remember to actually use that information in our file name when we create some information, like so. Now we have to say a label text. Ooh, this is going to be interesting. Yes, we have actually got func, so we don't really need to go through all of the faffery right now. So we just need to say if Ren'Py.has_label UI return, because we've actually returned the function name in this case, which is cool. So if it has a label for what we've clicked on, then we can say cool expression UI return. Nice and simple. And we could add an else function in there, but for now we'll just have it set so that if there is a label, something happens. If there isn't a label, then nothing happens. Quite simple there. And then we can obviously test and run that again, but this is going to work just fine. We just have to remember item click is going to be the thing that we populate our file name with. So in fact, we can copy that and we can come back to our classes file where we've got that annotation, and we can actually say simple environment clicks are click button type item click. Put that in quotation so that we don't mistake there. So that's good. So now we've got the stage where we can actually start populating our folder with icons. Now that we are within Photoshop or whatever your chosen image editing software is, this is the really simple part. This genuinely couldn't be any easier. What we're going to do is we're going to take our polygonal marquee tool and we're going to just marquee out a bit. So I'm just going to use something that I know isn't going to be interfering with our UI or anything like that. And I'm going to cut out this window up here. Yeah, just make sure I try and get the lines as straight as possible. Hit enter. That's fine for now. For demonstration purposes, this is fine. All we're going to do is we're going to hit the mask button. And there, lo and behold, we've cut out our button. Now we're going to go to File. And we're going to go to Export. And we're going to go to Quick Export as PNG. And then as you can see, I'm now in UI buttons. So now I just need to remember my file naming convention, which is going to be window with a capital W, because that's the nice name. In fact, we could just give this a front window. We're allowed spaces in our file names because it's not parsing based on spaces. Now we need to remember the rest of our file name convention. So we're going to come up into our name here. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to copy these and I'm going to paste them into the file name. So here I'm going to just say that, and now I can remember what I have to put in here. So location is going to be my underscore house. Button type is going to be item click. Is active is going to be true, and that's something else we haven't done yet, is we haven't passed it. Chapter I'm actually going to have as -1 or some alternative to it, because at the moment we have a situation where we can only have buttons active in the chapter. So I'm going to have to think of some value that's going to represent whether or not the item is going to be appearing, is going to need a chapter or not. So what I'm actually going to do in here is I'm actually going to write none, and then that's going to be the rest of our file name's done. So we're going to click save. That is done. So now we can return back to our code. So we actually have to add some additional code to parse the true and false nature of isActive. And also we need to now check if chapter equals none, then we're going to make file words none. Otherwise we're going to make it an integer. So we're going to go in here and we're going to firstly say if q dot, no, it's not q, sorry, it's file words, file words, and we're going to access, it is number, I can't remember now, blimey, temp func is active, so it's 4. If file words 4 equals true, file words 4 equals true, else file words 4 equals false. So that's sorted that problem out. Now we need to check if file words, and that is number 5, equals, or we're going to say not equal to, actually, is not equal to string none. And we can now remove this bit because we're going to pass it, we're passing it anyway, or rather we're checking it anyway, so I might as well convert it anyway. So file words 5 equals int file words 5. Else, no, we don't actually need to do that because if it says none, then it's just going to leave it as is. So we just have to remember not to put anything other than none or an integer in there. And yeah, so that's good to go. So now we've solved that problem. Let's just double check everything. And it now occurs to me that we're going to have to change our split to a minus symbol rather than an underscore, because the file naming convention or the naming convention of our locations uses underscores for the code friendly names. So what we're going to have to do is rename our image file to use minuses as the separating value instead of underscores, so that we don't get any clashes in there, which shouldn't be too much of a problem. It's still a fairly simple file naming convention. So I've just renamed my file to have minuses instead of underscores in between the values so that we can avoid any clashes with that. Also, what I've noticed after a little bit of thinking is that this is actually meant to be -4. What we had done there is where we put 11 and then 4, we'd actually basically turned X into an empty string because it was starting the string at 11 characters in and then ending it at 4 in. So we were actually basically destroying the entirety of the string. So changing that, remember to change that to -4, and then it will actually pass the file words in correctly, hopefully. And then on testing the game again, we can see that currently it's not crashing. When I click on where the window should be, currently nothing's happening, and that's because we don't have a label for it, and we don't currently have tooltips set to display anything anyway, so we can soon fix that. And in order to do that, what we come back to is come to our clicky screen, and then after the action, what we're going to do is we're going to say hovered tt.action, capital A, and then we're going to just set that to q.nicename. We're going to make sure we spelled that correctly as well. And now whatever happens, when we hover our mouse over our item, we will get our tooltip coming up. And now when we test our code, we've got everything looking normal. When I hover over where the window is, where the icon is, you can see we get front window. So what we've basically just done, ladies and gentlemen, is made it really easy for us to add new items to our game when we run the game for the first time. Obviously, if you are trying to update save games, this is going to be a bit more of a ball ache. So what I would recommend is don't add items after you've released your game, because it's going to be a pain in the bum. And what you can do is decide whether or not, in fact, to be honest, after thinking about it for a few seconds, it wouldn't actually be that bad for you to put this in after load. So there is a label that Ren'Py uses called after load, where you could actually run this function again, and all you would have to do is make sure that you're not overwriting any existing information. So you would have to double check if the information that you've got in your clickies list is currently changed from the default, and if it has, don't change it, which is not the end of the world. It's just one of those things that you'd have to be a little bit thinking outside the box on. But so all you can see is the window works, and all we've had to do is add an image file to a folder, and we can do that as many times as we like. Now, the only thing we haven't currently got is a label that's going to activate when we click on our information now, when we click on our icon there. So what we have to do now is we have to code that in. Now, returning back to our classes file, we can see that we've got a very simple naming convention for this. So in this case, it's going to be name, location, chapter. So in this case, it would be window, my house, and then that would be none because we don't have a chapter. So what we can do is we can create a new script which we can put in actually into our interactions. So let's go there, get a new folder, and we're going to call this one item clicks, and then inside that folder we can now add a new file, and this one's just going to be called window underscore my underscore house .rpy. So any interactions or files or labels that we create that require or that are related to the window outside my house are going to go into this file. Hit enter. Now we're going to go label. If you remember, it's called func underscore window underscore my underscore house underscore none. Okay, and then we can hit that there. And all we're going to do in this one is just say you clicked on my window, and then hit return there. We're going to spell return correctly, obviously, and save our file. Now we come back into our game and we can hover over it, see our tooltip still appears, and then when we click on it, it says you clicked on my window, and there we go. So that wraps it up for this episode, guys. Thanks ever so much for watching. I know that one was a long one, but hopefully you found it informative and learned a new skill that you can apply to other different things as well. Thanks very much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm sure you will, and I will see you in the next one. But until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, all right? Bye-bye.